Following rising tensions in West Asia and disruptions in the Straits of Hormuz, global markets are bracing for potential energy supply shocks and trade disruptions. However, analysts say Malaysia could be relatively well positioned to weather the uncertainty, given its status as a net energy exporter, stronger fiscal footing and diversified economy. So here to discuss how Malaysia can navigate these challenges, I have in the studio Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Centre for Market Education. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us in the studio.
Hi.
The tension that's ongoing right now. And just to start our discussion, let's talk about Malaysia. How resilient is Malaysia's economy if tensions in West Asia escalate further? We don't want this to happen, but potentially it could, and disrupt global energy markets.
Okay, let's start with the positive side, let's say the bright side. So Malaysia has some elements that may help in case of escalation, and these are some solid macroeconomic fundamentals. So GDP has been doing well in the past years. Inflation is under control. The labor market is stable. So we are entering the crisis, let's say, with a strong physical shape, let's say. So this is good. Malaysia is also well positioned in the region as a commercial and logistic hub, and Malaysia has some domestic hydrocarbon production. So these are the positive things that may help to build some sort of resilience. But at the same time, resilience doesn't mean immunity. So the situation, and I think here we are probably in the global conversation, there is still an underestimation of the consequences that may come if the situation escalates further. So the situation may be worse than what we can imagine in terms of energy disruptions and therefore the consequent economic downturn. And Malaysia may find itself, like all the other countries, facing, like it is already happening, rising energy costs that translate into higher transportation costs, and therefore these impact on not only the people that need to buy petrol at the gas station, but mostly and most importantly the industrial production of the country, which is obviously reliant on fuel.
Now, Dr. Carmelo, before we went on air, we've actually discussed some of the questions, and most importantly, let's talk about how 20% of global oil pass through the Straits of Hormuz. And you brought on the table previously, before we went on air, some interesting facts about those 20%, which breaks out into an 80%. But we'll get to that later. Now, if the situation around that Straits of Hormuz worsen, what would be the immediate economic implications for Malaysia?
Well, I think that the immediate consequence is rising prices, energy prices, and this translates, although not automatically, not immediately, but obviously what we will see is that some sectors are going to be affected relatively fast. Transportations and insurances and industrial production.
Right.
And this is one fact. And I think another fact that we are probably a bit underestimating is the transit of people through the Middle East. So not only the transit of goods, but the Middle East over the past few decades have become a very important passengers hub for the transit between East and West. And this transit is not just tourism with its economic consequences, but is also business. Business people traveling from Asia to Europe and to America through those hubs. And this will bring some slowdown in this kind of business transactions and business negotiations. So I think that we should prepare ourselves for something bigger than what we have in mind if the situation doesn't stop quickly.
Okay. Some cited, it's back to online. We can't travel much. Perhaps you can roll out your online meet and all those brand new way of meeting people, perhaps. Now, Dr. Carmelo, you just mentioned about 20% that breaks down into more than 80% of transits and probably oil production or distributions here in Asia itself. Would you like to elaborate on that one?
Yes, so I think it's a number that is circulating in all the news. More or less 20 to 25% of the global oil transit through the Strait of Hormuz. But interesting for us, of that 20%, 80 to 85% goes to Asia. And some countries, and in particularly China and India, are extremely dependent from that transit. They import via that route 40 to 45% of their oil need. So almost half. So this tells you how much they are dependent. And if you consider the role that China has as the factory of the world, and how important is oil for feeding the factory, this give you the ripple effect that may come. For Malaysia, around 25 to 30% of the imported oil transit there. So you're talking about 1/4 to 1/3, which is still a significant portion of the domestic need for oil.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for explaining that to us so that it gives us a better understanding on the Strait of Hormuz about that 20% and where does the oil go and why are we affected by it. Now, coming back to some of the questions, Doctor, as a net energy exporter, could Malaysia actually benefit from higher global oil prices?
Okay, this is a bit, a double-sided sword. So Malaysia is a net exporter of energy in general, but since 2022 is a net importer for oil, if we talk only about oil. So the situations may positively affect the energy, the domestic energy consumption, the domestic energy production and the industries that are producer of energies. But in the medium and long run, this is going to affect negatively the economy because Malaysia is an importer of oil on one side, and second, because of the very well-rooted system of subsidies. So while the revenues of companies like Petronas may grow, on the other side, we still need to import the majority of our oil, and that is going to be extremely costly from a fiscal perspective. And why is Malaysia an importer of oil? Because Malaysia produces a very high quality of oil, so a premium type of oil, and this precisely because it's a premium type of oil gets exported, while a lower grade gets imported and refined here. But the local reserves are slowly depleting, and we need over the years we had more and more need to import oil from other sources. And here Saudi Arabia and the Middle East plays a very important role.
Now, when you mentioned subsidy rationalization, I would like to bring in fiscal reforms as well in recent years that Malaysia has undertaken. Now, how important are these measures, in strengthening the economic resilience, the economic growth, etc.?
These are extremely important, but in order to produce the desired effect, they need to be taken extremely seriously. So something has been done, but probably too little on different sides. One is the general, let's say, fiscal approach that the government is trying to develop in terms of savings. There, I think a more radical discourse should be open, taking into account the very heavy role that GLCs play in the national economy. That is the real elephant in the room when we talk about government expenditures, together with the dimension on the public sector. On the other side, if we talk about only subsidy rationalization, in particular for RON 95, we may say that a true rationalization didn't really happen. Because it's basically a differentiation between foreigners and locals, and a true income-based approach has yet to be materialized. So a lot more work needs to be done, in particular to dismantle a system which I consider not healthy for an economy, a system radically based on subsidies that has been there for decades.
Yes.
And this has created addiction, dependence.
Right.
And to dismantle, when you have an addiction, the longer you go with the addiction,
it's going to cost.
The more painful is later to move out.
That's right.
And it becomes evident when you have a crisis, like in this moment.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for breaking that down for us. We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, could Malaysia's strategic location about this advantage that we're talking about could be a good thing for the country? Well, stick around and find out. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back to On the Table with me, Brenda Lepal, together with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. We're talking about economic resilience in the midst of the heightened West Asia conflict that is ongoing right now globally. Thank you, Doctor, for being here once again. Now, let's talk about a strategic location here in the country. Now, we focus so much on the Strait of Hormuz, but let's also not push or brush under the rug about the Strait of Malacca. Could that be the country advantage when we talk about global trade and also logistics?
Well, I think unfortunately we can't change geography and economic geography. So the Strait of Malacca had a very important and strategic production role during the era of the spicy trade. Now we have moved to a different stage of economic history, and the main trade is oil. And the main gateway for oil remain the Middle East as a production gateway. The Strait of Malacca is still an important passage point, but is a transit point. So if you close down the tap, which is there in the Middle East, then you have nothing flowing through the Malacca corridor, let's say. So it is an important point. It's good to be here, but if we dismantle the source of the goods that later transit here, then I'm afraid that we are not going to be shielded by heavy economic consequences.
Thank you. And let's talk about how important is it as well for Malaysia. Is it the time to diversify its export markets and supply chains, amidst its current geopolitical climate that we're actually facing right now?
So in general terms, we may say that diversification, both in terms of trade, external trade, so as a destination markets and as a supply chain, is always positive, is a matter of strategic decisions. And on this, I think Malaysia is playing quite well as a good diversification. But let's not forget the point here, which is the disruption of the main source of energy that feed basically every kind of production we have everywhere in the world. So our world economy is very much oil dependent. So I'm afraid that if things keep on moving in the direction in which they are moving and we don't find a solution, a diplomatic solution, because the problem here is not mainly economic, it's diplomatic. So we don't find a political and diplomatic solution, there is no diversification that is going to help, because the consequences of that disruption in the main energy sources that they produce in the world are really, I think, out of what we can possibly imagine.
No, Dr. Carmelo, you just mentioned that Malaysia is a diplomatic country, often upholds a neutral diplomatic stance. Now, could this be a factor? Could this be something positive that we can look out for in terms of preserving the economic relationships during this global tension?
I think that this is a very important point, and probably Malaysia, but not only Malaysia, maybe the whole ASEAN organization as a group could and should play a bigger role in the attempt to find a peaceful solution to what is going on. So Iran is a country that is in the middle between the two cultures, the two big groups, West and East, and probably ASEAN with its own cultural differentiation, with its own religious diversity, could play a role in setting a table for trying to find a reasonable solution out of here, playing on the fact that indeed what's going on doesn't produce any benefit to anybody.
Dr. Carmelo, in your own point of views, how significant or perhaps how influential is ASEAN in this whole regional tension that we're actually feeling? How could ASEAN, I would say, break a deal or move forward, you know, in terms of like being a regional bloc that upholds peace and stability amid this ongoing crisis? In your own words.
Yeah, well, if you see it, in fact, probably ASEAN doesn't exist as a diplomatic bloc in this moment. We see that Malaysia is talking for itself. Prabowo says something as candidate himself to play a role in the negotiations. But probably is in these moments of very important and global crisis that a group like ASEAN may find a common identity and based on that find the courage to step forward and play a role. So leave this moment of crisis as an opportunity to step up and raise the standard of self-identity.
Okay. Now, Malaysia is relatively stable fundamentals. You know, we just mentioned, and we've also spoke about energy resources and us being located at a very strategic location. Now, could this global uncertainty actually create opportunities for Malaysia? You know, truth be told, you know, whenever there's an issue that we are facing, it could also pave the way towards something greener. So, in your point of view, so what would it be?
Well, I think it's very, very difficult to imagine opportunities arising from the critical point we are living. And I tend to believe that in general, in the past years, the world is experiencing the attempt to move to something else from the world that we have known after World War II. So the power distribution, the balance of power between East and West. And these are dynamics that takes a long time to find their final outcome. So the crisis of the Strait of Hormuz could be like the crisis of the Suez Canal that basically put an end to the UK domination around the world somehow. But so an opportunity is indeed, as we mentioned, the possibility to step up in terms of geopolitical role. And another is really to try to think what's the world that we have in front of us in terms of balance of power. We have the empire of the moment, say that we see that we is trying hard to survive and to affirm its own dominant role, but at the same time, alternative forces have not emerged by having the same kind of strength and influence around the world.
Okay. Dr. Carmelo, let's bring it back to probably policymakers and how they could do something as well in order to move forward and just to cushion the impact, because we're not talking about the impact in the sense that, okay, we have a certain strategy of moving forward, we might not able to even feel it. The truth be told, we will be affected by it to a certain extent. Now, bring it back to policymakers, you know, what can they focus on to ensure Malaysia not only withstand this whole impact altogether, but to help cushion, you know, its effect of geopolitical tension that we are now facing?
Yes, in fact, as you mentioned, I mean, we have to be very honest, and the longer the situation goes ahead, the hardest it will, we will feel it. So, and there is no easy economic fix there, because the crisis is not economic in nature. So we have to be also very realistic. We don't stop what's going on with fiscal policy or monetary policy. That's not possible. One thing that should be done is to be extremely careful in trying not to second inflation tendencies.
Okay.
Obviously, there will be a readjustment of relative prices in the sense that the energy shock brings some prices up.
Right.
But if we avoid to inject more money in the system in the form of monetary easing or fiscal support, then once the crisis is over, the counter readjustment will be faster.
Okay.
Instead, if we second the increase in relative prices with expansionary moves, then we are going to create permanent inflation, like it happened with the lockdowns.
Right.
So all the packages, all the things basically created a permanent effect on prices, and people are feeling it now. So we have to avoid to fall into the same monetary temptation. That I think is very important. The other point is trying to take this as a chance to also reconsider our energy policy and being open at 360 degrees. So not just with slogans like green transitions, but with really market-led solutions that help us to move away from fossil fuels dependence. And I think that here probably the forbidden word is think about nuclear energy. That is the real green energy ahead. We should be probably more open to a discussion about that.
You mentioned about green energy. Could this be an opportunity for Malaysia to take a look into renewable energy? And if so, how prepared is the country, when it comes to its infrastructure to move and to delve into green energy?
So it is very important that the conversation on green energies is focused on sustainability globally intended, in the sense that environmental sustainability cannot be disjointed from economic sustainability.
Right.
So if and we have seen this recently, there was a statistics from China. You know that China has had an incredible boom on electric vehicles. The moment in which the subsidies were removed, Volkswagen regained the leadership in the sales in the vehicle market.
Right.
So means that a big part of the demand for electric vehicles was supported by subsidies. So basically was not economically sustainable. This is something we need to avoid.
Okay.
So we need to move towards solutions which are directed by market signals and not just move away. And the other problem is the energy that is needed for green sources is enough. And if we go to electric, the energy that is necessary for the electricity, how is it produced? So it's a more radical conversation, and that's why I mention nuclear energy, because it seems in this moment, at the current state of technological development, to be the only available solution which is both green and economically sustainable.
Now, Doctor, before we go, we spoke about renewable energy, but just to help all of us who are watching at home, in terms of the fuel subsidy and rationalization, how is it affecting Malaysia in the sense that if this war prolongs, and is it going to affect the GDP? Is it going to affect the economic fiscal deficit and somewhere along those lines of economic change and resilience as well? Let's be honest here.
Yeah, I mean, subsidies distort the structure of production in the sense that they drive your economic decisions based on cost of inputs, which is not the real cost. Okay, and the whole Malaysian economic structure has been built on this. Now, the moment in which prices of energies goes up, the subsidy bill is going to increase radically, and our own estimations are very close to the figures that have been recently quoted by the Prime Minister. So this means higher bill, means less fiscal space available for other things, for different kind of initiatives from the government. So means having either a higher deficit or spending less elsewhere. So it's going to affect the economy. That we cannot hide this very basic fact. But indeed, the government has been very open about it in putting the numbers forward, and this is probably really the chance also for the people to realize that there is something wrong in the system in its own, which is indeed a system based on subsidies, and the crisis is revealing that. And let's have the goodwill all together as a nation to gradually move toward a more sustainable fiscal system in which the people that are really in the need are not left behind, but those that can do without subsidies, independently from their nationality, are indeed supporting the fiscal structure of the country.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on the table. And with that being said, that concludes this episode of On the Table. So we've been speaking to, once again, Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Centre for Market Education. Now, this episode is on repeat, of course, and it's available on Berita RTM YouTube's channel. Until then, I'm Brandon Lepol. I catch you at the next On the Table. Thank you so much for watching, and take care, Malaysia.